probably seen this infographic. This is from the CDC early on in the pandemic. We did some surveys over the course of the summer, and this appeared in Morbidity and Mortality Weekly, which is an ongoing series that the CDC does. And you can see that during late June of 2020, like I said, about 40% of adults were reporting that they were struggling with some type of mental health or substance use concern. So even though we just looked at like the young people, and probably many of you are like, oh my gosh, those numbers are so high, we can actually see very similar trends in the adult population. What's been interesting during the course of the pandemic, though, is that older adults, more towards like what we would call the geriatric population, actually have experienced less disruption in their mental health throughout the course of the pandemic. So what about drug overdose deaths? If you saw the headlines on this, you also know that in 2021, that sort of year, that federal year between September of 2020 and September of 2021, we lost more than 100,000 people to overdose deaths. This was huge and actually ended up reversing some trends that we had made in getting a grip on, particularly the opioid epidemic. I'm now going to show you a comparison of the US versus Pennsylvania. You know, for again, those of you that work in substance use disorder care, you probably know that Appalachia, including Pennsylvania, was really kind of at the center of the opioid epidemic. We've done so much to try to bring these numbers down. But you can see, you know, that we have sort of lost some of the ground that we had earlier gained. You can see the numbers going up from 2015 to 2021. So I'm going to just give us a minute, and I want you to just think a little bit about beyond the numbers or beyond just the word, you know, depression, anxiety. I want people to share, how is this actually impacting people? You know, what are you seeing? Think about, what are you seeing at home that's letting you know people are being impacted? Or what are you seeing at work? You know, what are you seeing with your colleagues? Or when you look out into the community, you know, when you're out and about shopping or going to dinner, what are you seeing that lets you know that like some impacts are really being felt? Okay, I'm going to give it another moment here for some responses. I see at least two people who are mentioning that they're seeing more anger. Another person maybe saying that there's more of a negative attitude or impatience. I think those seem to kind of go together to me. I'll share with you, I feel like I've also seen that it just seems like people's fuse is a little bit shorter. If you're having a hard time with Menti and you want to put anything in the chat, let me know, or feel free to raise your hand. We definitely can do some talking here too. Someone today, I was talking to someone that works in a different facility who was telling me that their experience is that they feel like the staff that they work with, what used to seem easy and what used to seem just like what they do, now feels really overwhelming. Like everything seems hard now. And I see that, this whole idea of like coworkers and clients appear more stressed. I think people are really seeing this. I'm going to encourage you, though, to think about this also in the actual behaviors that you might be seeing. So like, are you seeing more absences from work? Are you seeing people that are like more tardy? Are you finding that your to-do list is growing, but it's harder for you to check things off of it. In part because you're overwhelmed, but maybe also in part because you just don't have the same level of energy. Like where might we be actually seeing this? Probably, maybe more places than we think, especially if we find ourselves, someone said like low tolerance for other humans. Sometimes how it shows up is because we feel negative or we can't tolerate one another. We're again missing that some of what we're seeing is because people are in distress. And what we're just picking up on are the things that are like kind of tough to take. I'll be honest, I have to like work hard sometimes when I see something I don't like, a missed deadline or a person has an attitude. I might have to, in my own mind, really redirect myself to be open to thinking, well, maybe there's something going on with the person versus just thinking that they're kind of a jerk. So I gave you a lot of like really hard information in this first section, largely because I think we just need to like call it what it is, and I have certainly heard a lot of people talking about this. I think we all know that it's happening, but looking at the data, maybe it grounds us a little bit to thinking like, yeah, this isn't just all in your head, this is really happening. People are indeed really having a tough time, and not just pockets of people, but pretty globally. I mean, it's really starting to say something when you're seeing numbers like 40% of young people, 40% of adults. So it's real. And now that we know that it's real, okay, well, like, what are we going to do about it? That's, I think, what we need to turn our attention to. So I'm going to offer you some tips. And the very first tip that I have is thinking about self-care. And I think there has been an absolute plethora of discussion about self-care during the course of the pandemic. And I'm not sure that I'm going to say anything different than what anyone else has said. But I do always find myself needing to remind my own self and remind the people that I know and care about that when we talk about self-care, we need to think about it in terms of our physical health, our emotional health, our social health, our personal well-being. We need to think about it professionally. We need to think about like our spiritual lives. Many times, self-care for people means like going and getting a massage. That's great. And that helps to take care of maybe one or two of your self-care domains. But what's happening if you're neglecting your spiritual self and you're neglecting your ability to connect, not even necessarily with a higher power, but just connect with other people as part of your spiritual well-being? Or are you feeding your curiosity of your mind? Like one of the great antidotes for burnout in our professional lives is getting curious again, finding something that we really want to learn about that helps us get regrounded in our field, because it's like, oh, it's something new, it's something different, it's something that I can like impact other people with. So yes, self-care, but thinking about it more broadly and also thinking about how do you evaluate that your self-care is really actually working for you. Okay, so I'm going to give you the example of the many people that I know that will say to me like, oh, my self-care is, that I'll like, I want to go and like watch Netflix for a couple of hours and just like zone out. I love doing that, by the way. But what happens is then sometimes when I should turn Netflix off and go to bed, I don't know if any of you guys do this too. I just watch the next episode. And then if you've noticed, every episode ends where you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And then you watch the next episode. And then maybe you're like me and, 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning comes around and you're like exhausted because your self-care, you thought it was self-care, but really it ultimately just like then set you up for something negative to happen. And I've known a lot of folks that find themselves in that same type of situation where, it's like, oh, I want to go out with my friends because it's going to be so great for my self-care. And then what I hear from them is like, oh, but I had 4 drinks and then I didn't feel good about it, or I didn't feel good about myself, or I felt like sick the next day. So I'm going to challenge you to really think about like when you say self-care, how do you know? How do you know that it's working? You know, like, how do you evaluate that? Do you evaluate it based on the consequences? Do you evaluate it based on how much it costs you and like time or money or what the rewards are? But to really dig in a little bit beyond like what we like to do for fun or what we like to do to relax, to more thinking of this as like, yeah, but what is actually like renewing me? What helps me find my resilience, and how do I actually evaluate that? So in terms of thinking about this and in terms of thinking about coping, you know, this is a slide I love to use. I pretty much work it into any facilitation discussion that I'm in, because what you see with these big five coping skills, if you know anything about cognitive behavioral therapy, the big five, basically, it's like the recipe for CBT. You know, you're taking care of your body by sleeping, by eating right. You know, remembering that with sleep, we need more of it than we think we do. Live in a culture where we're sort of chronically not sleeping enough. Same with young people. They need more sleep than they think they do. And a lot of times they need more sleep than we are encouraging them to have. I also know lots of people that they sleep with their phone like right by their face and are constantly in the night, like checking their email, checking their messages. Not helpful, you know. So think about, if sleep is one of the number one coping skills a human can have, like what can you do to enhance your sleep? Having a little bit more joy and mastery in your life, having some self-talk that's actually really working for you. So I'm going to just take a second and give an example of that, because a lot of people, especially young people, so this goes to like, what can we do to help to create calming environments? Many people don't know yet that their thoughts are something that they can change. And so if you are a person that you are fortunate enough to have like learned that lesson, remember what it might have been like for you when you first really started to realize that. And that maybe someone helped you, or you read something triggered that recognition that you could actually change that tape up there. And that is one of the most powerful ways that we learn to cope. I always like to give the example of when I'm late for work or when I'm late for something. Now, I will tell you, I do not prefer to be late. And I know no one really likes to be late. When I'm late, I start having that feeling of like, I'm inadequate, or I'm going to look stupid, or, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. And when I'm late, I get going on this thing where in my mind, I just hear, I'm late, I'm late, I'm late, I'm late. And then, you know, when you're driving and you're late, and you start to grip the steering wheel and your knuckles are turning white and you're getting like irritated, your whole body is tense because you're late. Well, what if, you know, the self-talk sounded a little bit like, okay, you're late. Probably other people have been late before. You're going to be okay. You're only going to be 5 minutes late. And you know that the meeting probably won't even have started by then anyway. And just kind of talking yourself down. What if, you know, your self-talk sounded a little bit different in as many circumstances as you can control and you can shift? And what if that tension that filled your body, you know, what if that energy that it took to get wrapped around the steering wheel or to get irritated with someone else, or all the energy I flooded my body with to keep my muscles tense, what if that energy went to something a little bit more productive? So I'm encouraging you really to think about that, because self-talk, this is one of the easiest things that we can start to address. And it is really like low hanging, and we can often change very simple things and then get more complicated with it. You know, it's actually you're closest to your thoughts. They're with you all the time. So unlike, you know, when people say, oh, well, to change my diet, I have to like shop, or, oh, to exercise, I have to get outside, or I need to like go somewhere, go to the gym. With your self-talk, you're with yourself all the time. So you have like basically endless opportunity to try to impact this if you start getting into thinking about it a little bit differently. And, you know, you can think about this in a more assertive way where we're talking about reframing our thoughts and changing our thoughts, or you can think about it in the way of like meditating and just allowing yourself that time and space away from maybe that persistent voice that might cause you a little bit more stress. Because for most of us, a big piece of why we're stressed, actually, it's not the events themselves. It's, you know, like, what are we telling ourselves about them? But I also want to make sure that when we're thinking about coping strategies, we remember that these are very, very subjective. What brings one person joy might be awful for someone else. I love to be outside. I love to go hiking. Not everyone likes that. Actually, for some people, that would sound very stressful. I told someone I'm going hiking next weekend, and they said, that sounds awful. Told me that their idea of kind of a great weekend getaway was in a really luxurious hotel room, and we sort of laughed about that. But remember that for this to really work, you have to get to know yourself a little bit and do the things that work for you. And remember that a big part of self-care sometimes too is not being alone always. Sometimes it's actually doing things like volunteering and giving to other people, or thinking about the things that we're grateful for. Just because it says self kind of in the title, it doesn't mean there are things that we do alone. Actually, a lot of times self-care involves connecting with other people. Okay, so try some little hacks here. I'm gonna tell you about some of my favorite ones that are really kind of fun ways to deal with anxiety or to deal with stress during the day. The first thing that I would offer you is blowing bubbles. Now, I don't know how many of you have tried this, but actually blowing bubbles is one of the best ways to teach yourself how to do diaphragmatic breathing. And it's one of the absolute best ways to teach kids how to do it. If you are a fan of blowing bubbles, you know that when you're doing it, you can't make the bubbles work if you're not going sort of low and steady. So having that contest to see who can build the biggest bubble is actually an excellent way to teach little kids about this and to help slow your own breath down. To do a fake laugh. I don't know if you've ever done this exercise. It's actually one of my favorites. I used to love to do it with my students, because inevitably, especially when you do the fake laugh exercise with a group of people, you end up with loads and loads of real laughter. The thing about this is that the brain is not super good at differentiating between a fake laugh and a real laugh. So, if you can get this going, what ends up happening is it sort of tricks your brain a little bit into thinking that something's funny. But remember, laughter also is an excellent way of like pumping a ton of oxygen into your body. And again, getting that diaphragmatic breathing going, especially when you really get going with a big belly laugh. So, I know it sounds silly, but it works. There's actually a meditation that you can do that is laughter. So people use this in a lot of ways because laughter is so good for the body. It's very true that laughter is, I'm not sure it's the best medicine, but it's up there. It's like, it has really good value for us. Music is another one. Music actually has been shown to have an impact on our mood, just like, moderate levels of exercise can help to deal with moderate depression. So can music. So if you're a music person, how can you work this in? Like listening to a song, singing a song. What would it be like if when we went to work, a meeting started or ended with a song? I tried this at least once during the pandemic. We had everyone sent me privately if they could pick their own theme song, what would it be? And we played it in a meeting and then tried to guess like whose songs they were. It was pretty fun because of course there's like probably a 30-year age gap between the oldest folks and the youngest folks. It was also kind of fun to see which songs went with which generational parties. Lots we can do with music though. This one, switch seats, change perspectives. There's something to just where you're at. I'll tell you that some days when I've just been at my computer too much, I actually will go and sit at my table, or I'll go and sit somewhere else because I just need to make my brain wake up again. Your surroundings make a huge difference. And for so many of us during the course of the pandemic, we've been tied to our computers. So anything that you can change in your environment can really help here. Think small. Okay, that's why I'm telling you these are really short. Think about like, can you walk around outside your building? A quick lap makes a huge difference. What I observe with a lot of us, especially when we get wound up, is that we start telling ourselves like, oh, I need to finish this. Well, the more we're like pushing ourselves, the more we might sometimes be expending energy in the wrong ways. Whereas actually, if we got up and did that 2-minute walk, we may find that what was going to take us 15 minutes, suddenly it takes 5 minutes because we've just gotten our brains going again. So sometimes having the discipline to not do something is just as important as having the discipline to do it, because we give ourselves that energy, we hit the refresh button. If you're not thinking about like doing meetings outside, I would encourage you to, if you have a private space, if you can do walks during supervision, anytime you can get outside, loads and loads and loads actually of literature about how sunshine and nature are very powerful to help people deal with anxiety. So if you can get outside, do it. Humor, jokes. I said dad jokes because of course we want to like keep it clean. So jokes that like are not going to offend people, jokes that are easy for everybody to understand, jokes that help people feel together, not jokes that exclude people, but humor is really important here. Think about a dress down, for our team here, my team at Safe Harbor. Oh my gosh, nothing gets them going like happier more than if I say, oh, okay, you can wear jeans. And I'm wearing jeans today. Totally changed my life. If I get to wear jeans and sneakers, I have a little bit more like pep in my step. Think about like, are there environments that you can do that? Think about, in your environments, for those of you that are doing constant meetings, there's no like magic to a 60-minute meeting. So think about, can you take all your 60-minute meetings and turn them into 50-minute meetings? Because then you know what people get to do in that 10 minutes? They get to go to the bathroom. And that actually calms the body down. They get to like hydrate. They get to actually eat. So just anything that you can like compress a little bit to give people some unstructured time. Oh, okay. So Jennifer's saying that they really enjoy outside meetings and sometimes they make them lunch meetings. Yeah, amen. We have a picnic table here. Lots of really good work gets done at picnic tables. I used to do a constant loop when I was out doing supervision. And that was some of my favorite way to get supervision done, actually, was in a walk. Shift your route to work, take the long way home sometimes or take a shorter way, but just think about these little variations again, like change your brain. Think about like, could you, when you're at your desk, can you put nature sounds on? Because there's actually some literature that indicates if you hear like bird noises or if you hear like the outdoor sound of insects, that it actually like calms your body. And so you can bring these things into your office space. It's free. How could you be utilizing some of these tools that we have available to us? Or quick round of card games, bullet journaling, having a daily goal that is achievable, but just setting a goal. The fact that we look to the future actually promotes hope. Talking with people about being grateful for them. This one, I cannot say enough that in the literature about well-being and what's protective, we know that when people express gratitude for one another, they have an almost like immediate bolster to their sense of well-being. And what I would strongly encourage you to do is not just think about what you're grateful for and who you're grateful for, but then tell them, because then you translate that feeling into a behavior that is positive, that will make you feel better. And the bonus is you're also going to make that person feel better. So it's that like ripple, it works. Really something to be said for expressions of gratitude. Susan, I'm loving this, that you have no neighbors and you sit on your porch and you listen to the silence, which I think is a thing to do. And that what you hear is pheasants and birds. And I think any one of us, gosh, it just relaxes me to say that out loud, just listening to the birds chirping. It's amazing. If you're into this, there are like the Calm app. Headspace actually has just bird noises, and they have a timer and you can like turn it on and listen to bird noises to go to sleep, or you can just again have it at your desk. Make a big difference. So here's the question. How long does it take for a person to feel really like seen by someone? You all know what I mean by that. Not visually seen, but like how long does it really take to actually feel connected to another person? I'm curious about your responses, then I'm going to ask you to put some things in the chat. How long does it actually take to feel validated? Ten minutes. Okay. Kristen, do you mind? Deborah says less than a minute. So Kristen, I'm going to ask you first. Do you mind unmuting yourself and saying why 10 minutes and what were you thinking about? Jennifer, can people unmute themselves? Or am I asking people to do things they can't do?
No, she can.
Oh, she can, and she is unmuted. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
No, I was just thinking, whenever you first either meet somebody, sit down, chit chat, or even just, meet somebody in person and, start a conversation. Generally, you can get, I don't know, a feeling from them, whether or not you have that connection. So I don't know. I think for me, it takes a little longer than, a minute or two. So you get that feeling back from them.
Mm-hmm. When you said you get that feeling, what did people do, or what does that feel like? Say a little bit more about that.
Well, just that feeling of validation, that somebody's actually understanding something that you're saying. There's, you get that little bit of connection to somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to put into words, but I think we've all been there, where you're saying like you feel like the person actually understands what it is that you're saying. And you feel something. There's that like energy there, right? So that's interesting to me. Thank you so much. And then there was a person, let me get in my chat here, that said, so Deborah, you said less than a minute. And I'm like really curious to hear more about what type of experience you're thinking of.
I think it's very important, body language. And when you're with someone, you can tell if they're listening to you. If they see you, it doesn't take long.
Mm-hmm. What's it like to be on the receiving end of that feeling of like they're really with you? What does that feel like for you?
It just feels reassuring, like I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we need verification, not often with me, but we need verification. It's okay to feel that way. It's okay if you're saying that.
Yeah.
I see you.
Yeah.
You're okay.
Yeah. So, Deborah, this is like such a great level of insight. I feel like so far the two of you have said you felt understood in this moment. There's some kind of energy, again, hard to put into words. And you just said you're okay, right? Like you get that sense when you're really connected to someone that you're okay.
Like you already know you're okay, but you just need someone else outside yourself to say, you're okay.
Yep.
It just helps to have that somebody on earth knows that I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love that. And I've definitely been there. I mean, I am definitely not afraid to admit that actually just this week, I called someone and said, I just need to say some stuff out loud. And then for you to tell me that I'm still making sense.
Yeah, along those lines right there. You know you're making sense. You just need someone to say, you're making sense. Just one. You don't need an audience, just one human.
Yep. No, I completely agree with you. And so I think in the context of this, why I feel like this is such an important conversation to have is because we started with the very title of today's discussion as reclaiming calm. And so I think that's part of it sometimes is connecting to someone and just helping them be seen. And so we've heard, maybe it's going to take 10 minutes. Maybe it'll take less than a minute, depending on the context. Tracy, you said months, and I'm really interested in this. Tracy, will you talk to us about why months?
Yeah, because I think when I looked at that, like, how long does it take to feel seen? And seen was all in capital. To me, that's like to really see who I am, where I'm coming from. I don't know that I would probably put that out in less than a minute or 10 minutes, because I feel like there's parts of us that we naturally hold back because of self-preservation. So, I mean, if seen wasn't all in capitals, I probably would have answered differently, but because seen was all in capitals, to me, that was like to really see into my heart. That's not going to be instantaneous.
Yeah. I think many of us can relate to that, right? Like, what does this mean? How deep are we going with the connection? Now, Tracy, if I might ask you, for someone that you have had that level of connection to, how long does it take with them, the person that's close to you?
Minutes.
Minute.
In fact, last week I got a text from somebody that I didn't even speak to, but that saw me across the room. And she texted me and said, "You're sad today. What's going on?" But I've known her for a very long time.
Yeah. And is it okay to ask, what's it like when someone knows you that well?
It's kind of like that double-sided coin. It's scary but refreshing all at once. Because I didn't want to tell her what had me down. And it bothered me that she knew, but I also felt comforted that somebody figured it out and I didn't have to break that ice.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for being okay, like telling us all this, because I think too, in that interest of us trying to sort out, okay, we're all raw right now, probably, or some variation thereof. Thinking about how to like be there for other people is a really important part of that. And so that is like, well, how do you help a person feel like you're listening and that you're understanding what they're saying? And that can happen quickly. It can happen over time. But Tracy, I feel like what you really also added to the conversation is sometimes connecting to people means we're willing to go out on a line too and sort of say, hey, something feels off to me. We're willing to be the person that has the hard conversation. Like you said, someone else broke the ice and it was sort of scary, but also really comforting to know that someone would. And most of us like ultimately want that, because that is part of being seen, is being seen when things are not okay. That concept of like, sometimes it's okay to not be okay. Okay, Emily. So however long it takes for them to provide feedback or body language that they are truly hearing what I'm saying. Emily, will you say a little bit more about that? Like what it means to this truly hearing. I get the sense that the word truly is very, very important here. So do you mind saying a little more about that?
I can try. I'm working from home with my 17-month-old, so she might be talking in the background, but just by their body language. If when I'm talking to them about something and their body language looks closed off, then I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel like they're seeing me, they're hearing me. So I kind of just end it there. But if their body language is open and calm, there's eye contact, then I feel seen and heard.
Yeah. So, gosh, thank you for that, because I think several of you have mentioned like the body really matters. And I think we're describing that when we want to be seen and we want to be connected, we're actually looking for the other person to look back at us in some ways, right? We're looking for that like eye contact. We are probably looking at the person's facial expression and hoping for some type of openness or comforting type of expression. We're also paying attention. Does the person look like they're in a hurry? Do they look closed off to us? And so we can like take this and be thinking about, okay, what do we need? And like Mr. Rogers said, look to the helpers, look to the people that do this, because they're great people to kind of be connected to. But also in hearing this, how can we think about like, what can we do to create this type of experience that I really just love that hearing I'm okay, you're okay. So what can we be doing when other people are talking to us and looking to talk to us that sends the message beyond the actual words that we're using? You're okay. Because what that does, you're okay, right? Just immediately de-escalates the situation. Who doesn't love to hear like, okay, things are going to be okay. Even if sometimes we're not really sure that they are, that feeling of being okay, even in the chaos. I think you all know what I mean. Nobody here is saying we want to just feed people a bunch of crap that everything's going to be okay. But creating that sense that we're in it together and we're joined, we're facing something together and you're okay. Really powerful thing that we can do for one another. So Colby and Abby, I'm reading automatically if you're connected to that person, and I just want to hear like a little bit more about what you were thinking.
Sorry, can you hear us?
We can hear you.
All right, so I was just thinking, like, if you had a relationship with that person that you're trying to kind of relieve some of your anxieties and your worries to, that you would be able to tell based off of, again, like the body language, how they're responding to you. You'll be able to tell if they can connect with you or not. And I think a lot of times we kind of subconsciously know who will connect with us and who won't, and who will be able to understand us and who won't. So I think it's just really based off of, your personal connection with that person and knowing that person as well as them knowing you. So, I mean, there's a lot of, like, I have a couple friends, that probably wouldn't be able to understand my parenting anxieties, but they might be able to understand my professional anxieties. So I wouldn't go to them with like stuff that's going on with my teenager, but I might go to them with stuff that is going on at the workplace that I need to talk about. So.
Yeah, I love that, because I think you're adding a couple of really important layers, which is that like, well, it again depends. And someone else had kind of landed on this too, that like you might share parts of yourself, but not everything, or you might share more in one area with someone. And we're looking for that match. But what I really value about what was just said is how quickly we can feel very seen and very validated and almost immediately recognize that we're joined and that we're connecting, but that at the same time, how quickly we might turn someone off to us, how fast that happens, that people can feel connected or disconnected, more on the disconnected side, I would think. So please, I'm going to ask you to use the chat again. I'm just curious, as we're having this conversation about connecting and being seen, what are you thinking as this relates to helping where we're at in our culture with how much people are struggling with depression, how much people are struggling with anxiety, or even struggling with thoughts of suicide? How do you see this discussion of connection relating and truly seeing people? Again, feel free to chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I think I can handle that with the chat, the hands, the presentation. But I'd really love to hear, where this is taking you in terms of all that initial content about kind of the state of our mental health right now.
Mandy, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I sure can. Well, it was one of those long gobbledygook type of questions. I'm interested in how people are processing this idea of seeing one another and connecting, how you feel like this relates to how much distress people are in right now. So another way to think about this is there anything that we can learn in this conversation about being seen that could help us with this big challenge that we're facing with the number of people that are struggling with their mental health? Do you, or do you see anything there? Do you see any potential? Okay, I'll give it just another couple seconds, just in case anybody has anything. So I think for me, what I see with this is that to truly impact what people are going through, to truly help them, to help ourselves, we have to figure out how to get connected. So this idea for me is like, we have to start here. How do we help people feel more connected again? Because that's how we get that, like, hey, you're okay. You're okay. And I'm okay. And we're together in this type of feeling. So in the chat, I'm just going to start with, okay, Susan, do you want to say anything about how this depends on how people respond to you? Susan, anything about how people respond to you?
She's probably typing. I don't think she can unmute.
Okay, no problem. And then Jen, you said you think it's important that people like get you and that feels very calming. So are you saying that connection, you can actually experience its impact on your mental wellness?
Definitely. There's certain people that when I'm around them, yeah, I just feel more centered and grounded, and like I can just be myself and don't have to explain myself. And yeah, I find that to be very calming.
Mm-hmm. I have a person in my life that describes that as having a soft place to land. Being able to just fully be yourself is incredibly comfortable. And I think when we start to make that connection of like, oh, this is like a really important ingredient to feeling calm, we start to remember that the relationship is like the building block to wellness for us, for all the people around us. If we want to be thinking about helping others, helping ourselves, we have to think about relationship as a big piece of that. So connection is huge with that. Okay, so Emily says she feels like people that are connected with themselves, this is really interesting, do the hard work, they keep themselves grounded. And they worked on themselves somewhat during the pandemic. And she's also saying that she feels like people that were disconnected are probably more disconnected now. So Emily, I'm curious about this. I know you're juggling, you're doing double duty there, but I do want to hear more about when you said being more connected to yourself. That I feel like, can you just say a little bit more about that? And then I promise everyone will move on.
That's kind of hard to describe, but I guess with being more connected with yourself, being just more aware of your feelings and emotions. So maybe like if you start to notice that you're getting more depressed or having more anxiety, just recognizing that sooner helps with it before you're to the point where you're having a full-blown panic attack or so depressed that you don't want to get out of bed. Just kind of being more in tune with your body and your emotions and what's going on definitely helps.
I would agree. I feel like we could take this back to that initial first tip around self-care too, to kind of take it to that next level beyond superficiality, but to like really be looking at ourselves. So this idea of like seeing other people, we have to apply it to ourselves too, to kind of sometimes move through the things that can create anxiety for us or that can be triggering of depression for us. Sometimes that means really seeing and owning how we're feeling and like confronting that, and then being willing to, as Emily said, do the hard work. So ultimately, coming into that space where we really confront the reality and we connect with it, we connect with ourselves, we connect with other people. I promise you, this is like one of the most important ingredients to even remotely thinking about trying to do something to promote wellness. First, we have to get to even connecting to what that means. So my next tip is, flex your resiliency muscles. I love this slide. I love this picture of Rocky. I'm definitely in the Rocky demographic. I have the gray jumpsuit. I love Rocky Balboa, and in part because he just gets up so much and he's so disciplined in terms of like building that resilience. That's how I think about this. Resilience isn't just something, that you're born with. It's something that you, yes, are born with, but that you can grow, and there are things that challenge our resilience. It's not totally in our control, but there are a lot of things that we can do to build it up. So how do we do that? The first is by reducing stressors that are in our control. And I want to emphasize that this only works if there are things that are really in your control. So as I said, sometimes when I'm talking with people about stress reduction in their lives, they're like, oh, I need to quit my job because it really stresses me out. And I'm like, immediately like, whoa, like, can we start with something simpler? Can we start with, are you eating lunch every day? Can we start with, do you make time to, like talk to your number one supporter once a week? Or do you actually take breaks and go to the bathroom at work? I mean, this is a legitimate thing that I hear lots of people actually telling me they don't have time to go to the bathroom. Are you making sure that you balance your screen time? Let's start with the little things that are going to take the edge off. Maybe it is that leaving for work 5 minutes earlier. Maybe it is actually leaving your desk at 5 o'clock. And even if you still have work to do, just doing it someplace more comfortable for you. Is it actually planning to use time off instead of only using it when you're sick or where you're sort of forced to? It's only, kind of what is going to work for you. I have shared, and gosh, poor Jennifer, because she, I think, has heard about my Sunday routine probably 100 times at this point. My little one here that totally changed my life. I get out all my clothes on Sunday because I don't like to have to think about it during the work week. And it reduced my stress. I can't tell you how much better my mornings are. I know that sounds like ludicrous, really small thing. Plus, I find ironing to be oddly cathartic. You're going to know the things that will work for you to just put you in a better space so that then you can use the leftover energy to deal with other bigger things. You can always tackle something bigger. But a big piece of resilience is actually by reducing these little things. Think about your coping skills. I'm going to keep up with this theme. We talked about coping skills at the beginning. We talked about it in the middle. We're talking about it again now too. Use what works, but only if you really know it works. Like, how do you know? How do you know that it was actually effective? And, evaluate that in a more meaningful way. And are you thinking about trying new things? We often, a lot of us, we get stuck in these habits. But if there's one thing that the pandemic has taught a lot of us, right, it's that we can't do the old things in the new situation and think that they're going to work in the same way. So if our way of blowing off steam was one drink, well, guess what? During the pandemic, for a lot of people, it turned into 3 drinks. It turned into 4 drinks. Like during the pandemic, deaths by alcohol increased by 25%. So thinking about like, what do we do now is really important. If you haven't asked yourself, how am I changing what I do to fit the circumstances that I'm in? I'm just going to keep encouraging you to really think about this and do it with intention. And then find ways to increase positive feelings in your life and a sense of mastery. Now, again, the core of cognitive behavioral therapy, which we know works, by the way, to help people with depression and anxiety. So the things that bring you joy, it doesn't have to be joy for 9 hours, and you may not want to do it, and you may not even immediately feel a sense of joy. Even things though that you remember at one time brought you joy, try to push yourself to do them. And if you find something that gives you that feeling of joy, try to make space in your life for it. You may have seen there's some literature out there. I think there's a TED Talk going around right now about the fact that, like, as we get older, you know, when you ask little kids, like, when did you last laugh? It was probably 10 minutes ago. When you ask adults, many of them, they don't remember, or they can't quite tell you the last time that they felt silly, or sometimes they'll go to the end of the day. And if you say, like, hey, what'd you laugh about today? They don't know, or it was nothing. It's important. It's really, really important to try to find some things that capture a little bit of joy and do more of it. Now, this control piece, many of you are familiar with this, things that help you feel a sense of mastery. So this is something that takes some effort, but that you really truly feel in control of the product with. This also really works. That whole experience of stepping back and seeing that something's done and you did it. And this could be everything from weeding your garden or having a beautiful flower garden, mowing the lawn and looking at how beautiful it is, baking those prized sugar cookies, you know, like whatever it is. But creating more opportunities for that feeling, it's really important. I can't overstate this, especially for those of you, I'm thinking many of us, because a lot of us, I think, are here in our workspace. A lot of us have jobs that it's like, it never ends. And we might do something, but then it's like undone very quickly. So a lot of times we experience feeling out of control. During the pandemic, that's been one of the hardest things, feeling out of control, feeling like our routines are changing constantly. So those little things, it's really no wonder people got into making sourdough and banana bread, because you know what? You make it, it's done, you eat it, like stay finny, right? So we love those types of things. Do more of those. Do more of those. Go down to the pet store and play with puppies. Yep. Animals are huge for helping us cope. So in the same vein, I'm playing, of course, on this whole concept of vaccination or inoculation. Do you know actually that you can do more to increase your stress tolerance? So just like you can do more to build your resilience, you can like do stuff actually to help impact how much stress you feel. Some of that is becoming more self-aware, you know, so I think it was Emily that shared with us earlier, are you like scanning your body? You know, do you know, like for me, when my eyebrows start to knit together, or I notice I'm grinding my teeth, or I'll look down and I'm like, why am I making fists, right? So like scan, you know, ask yourself, what am I doing? And like, why? What is happening right now that I'm getting my stress level kicked up? Remember that for most of these things, it's going to be about our own reactions versus the event itself. You know, ask yourself, is this triggering me because I feel disrespected? I feel inadequate. I'm second guessing myself. It brings up an old wound. What is it? Because if you start to understand what's happening, then you can do something about it because you understand what the challenge is that you're facing. And then once you start to like get that, think about, well, how do you anticipate the situation? And more importantly, how do you prepare for it? You know, what is it that you can change? If you keep doing the same thing in whatever the stressful situation is, you're just going to get the same result. You know, I think we've all heard that, but it takes a little bit of like, okay, well, then I'm not going to do that. That means you have to plan to do something different, you know? I can give you lots of examples of this, right? So my poor husband, the example I give a lot actually is if I walk into my house every day and just expect that there won't be any dishes in the sink, well, I'm going to maybe set him up, I'm going to set my kids up, and I'm going to set myself up. So either they're going to change or I'm going to change. But if they're not changing, Well, the only thing that I can control is myself, right? So I can think, okay, when I walk in today, there might be some dishes in the sink. How am I going to handle that? Right. And that is a really small, tiny example. But I just want everyone in the virtual room here to ask yourself with honesty how much time you might spend getting stressed out about stuff that it's like the same thing over and over and over again, but you're expecting the thing to be different instead of expecting like you to be different in the context, right? I have done lots and lots and lots of work with couples and families in my career. And I know that things like the dishes or the laundry or picking something up or forgetting to do something, those are the things that actually consume a lot of families' energy. And maybe they're things that we could tweak a little bit differently. Finally, with this whole idea of shifting our stress response, remember that anxiety, so if we're here talking about like reclaiming calm, anxiety loves avoidance. Anxiety loves for you to whatever is stressing you out, like not address it. And then anxiety just takes over that space. It grows. It grows in the face of avoidance. Even if early on, we think we feel better, what we actually do is grow the problem. So I know that this is hard, but this means instead of avoiding the things that trigger us, within reason, right? We should, of course, have boundaries for people that are abusive to us. I'm talking more about things that we avoid because it's hard, for instance, to confront someone, or we avoid going to our supervisor because we don't prefer them, or we avoid paying the bills because it's hard to confront how much money we do or do not have, those types of things. Remember that actually the more you lean in, and this is why the exercise metaphor makes a lot of sense, the more you use this muscle, the easier it gets. When we avoid, we sort of lose the tone in that muscle. Actually, the problem gets harder for us to solve. Routines really matter. So anytime, we're thinking about quick, easy ways to help our mood, remember that transitions are really challenging. So for young people, for us, this is like anytime our workflow changes, anytime we have to learn how to do a new thing, unstructured time is really difficult for people. This is why so many folks struggle with like lunch times, break times. Even now, what I sometimes observe is people having a hard time in meetings during the time that's unstructured, like just talking to each other. So, remember that. Think about, are there ways to add tools or structure that could create a little bit of comfort there? Remember that a lot of people are facing loss right now. And part of what happens with loss, aside from just how profoundly sad it is that it throws off everything. So in a family where there's been a death or a loss or a separation, remember that it's not just the person and the heartache. It's like whatever that person's role was, suddenly everything is all turned upside down. Well, because of the pandemic, remember we started earlier saying 30% of students surveyed said that someone in their family lost their job. Big transition time challenges. Think about in your own environments. I don't know what it's like where you're working, but I'll tell you, I've never in my professional career seen so much turnover, constant like changes, right? These are really hard for us. So think about how in your space and in your own life, you can build routines that create comfort for you, whether it's like prioritizing a family meal to ground yourself in. If it's like a little routine you can do for yourself in the workday, maybe it's that you have the same lunch because that works for you. Maybe it's a routine that you have with like a certain meeting that you create some type of pattern to it. Think about using technology to support some of these routines. Think about like even things where I know plenty of people that they go home and the first thing, especially I see it on social media all the time, go home, put your sweats on immediately, or go home and like take off your formal clothes immediately. Those types of things. Remember that routine, it's good for us physically, but like it shifts our minds too. Anything we can do to create routine that is comfortable. So So Susan's saying she's terrible without structure. And you know what, Susan, I would just share with you is that most people actually do benefit from routine. I don't think that that is uncommon. You know, routine with enough flexibility, because if we're too rigid, right, that doesn't help either. But actually, for most of us, sudden change and unstructured time, we don't deal well. It tends to create more distress for us. Okay, so tip number 5, you know, remember that whatever we're thinking about right now, whatever you brought in to the conversation about how to deal with anxiety, how to deal with depression, how to think about like kids coming back from school and people that you're helping and people in the workplace, everything that we're talking about happens in this like much, much larger environment, right? And so over the past year, we have seen terrible things aside from the pandemic. There has been currently, right, the conflict and war in Ukraine. There was George Floyd. There were like multiple issues around race and gun violence and police issues. And I'm in Erie right now, this week, school shooting here, right? Bigger environment. And in my environment, the school shooting this week, you know what people were talking about? There were people here that survived the middle school shooting that was like 20 plus years ago. It brought all that up. So that larger past environment is even influencing us. We've seen celebrity suicides. There's the constant churn of social media. If I see one more article about like the heartache of the environment and how much like environmental distress there is, I mean, I could go on, right, with like the negative headlines that we're all exposed to. So, you know, we have to remember that like whatever we're paying attention to, there's all this other stuff coming at us constantly too. So I want to talk to you just for a minute about like limiting your exposure to that in some way. And everyone has to make their own decisions about this. I'm not here to say that there's a right or wrong way. I'm just here to say, remember it's happening, and then think about what you can do that will be most helpful for you. So for children, it's actually particularly critical to limit exposure to things. So little ones especially, so like the 6 and under crowd, when they see things on television, they're not necessarily good at knowing that, for instance, after 9/11, that the towers, the planes flew in once per tower. But when we play it over and over and over and over again, for a little person, they can't tell that it's not like something new. Their little brains have such a hard time like organizing that information. So remembering it's important to limit that exposure or understand that they're not able to process what they're seeing in the same way. Understanding too that we all know this. We all know that somehow we manage to live in a world where horrible things happen and very beautiful things happen too. So when we're thinking about what we're teaching kids, I just want you to think about if the television's on in the background and if what they're seeing is the news, what are they learning about the world? And what it is that the message that you want to send? And if so, awesome. If not, you know, we just need to be asking ourselves, like, are they learning like a balanced view? Are we learning a balanced view? You know, sometimes I visit websites that are like all about good news because I try to remind myself, even working in mental health, you know, I have spent my whole career seeing people that are struggling, and I don't get to see quite as much of people getting like better. But the reality is that's just because I don't see them. It doesn't mean that it's not happening. It's that my worldview is kind of narrow. And so anything you can do to like challenge that can be extremely helpful to you. Think about setting a timer. This is a conversation I've had a million times over the years with clients that I've worked with and with myself. There have been plenty of times in my life that I have been so consumed with something I was worried about. I could not get myself to stop thinking about it. that I would sometimes literally set a timer for myself and say, okay, go ahead and have every worry that you want, every possible worst case scenario, do it to it for the next 10 or 15 minutes. Then when the timer goes off, you have to find a different place for your energy, because any of you that have ever worried about something that you can't control, you know what I'm talking about. You know, you can only spend so much time, for instance, trying to turn $100 into $200 before you just realize, okay, I'm at this point, I have to change what I'm doing somehow. Think about creating experiences where there are no devices, or where you can limit your use of these. Someone immediate in the initial discussion that we were having said, you know, that they find people like turning to their devices constantly. So think about like, okay, well, if you want to connect more and you feel like devices are getting in the way, can you create, you know, in your house, at the dinner table, everybody's phone goes into a basket, or in the office, just to say like nobody on their phones for the next 15 minutes, whatever it is. Think about how to put a stop to that, because so much of what I hear people saying about the outside world is that it feels very intrusive to them because they're connected to it like 24 hours a day. So how can you create this experience where you choose how much exposure you're getting and when and under what circumstance, and like what is that like? You have the power to like make some of those decisions according to how it fits with your values. And so that's that kind of last point. You know, remembering, especially with young people, I got a lot of questions about this this week. You know, how do we talk to young people about school shootings? Should we talk to them? And the answer is always like, yeah, you should talk about your values, because when you talk about your values, you go back to that thing of like, you see yourself, you are more in touch with yourself. You can then feel like, okay, I'm okay. Like, I know what's important to me. I feel strong in who I am. And if you are talking about your own children or you're talking about your colleagues, well, if you're not talking to them about your values, who is? Right? So especially if we're talking about our like young people in the face of all of this, if we're not talking about our values, where is that coming from? So, you know, as people out there like shaping this experience of how do we create more healthy and calmer environments, part of this is going to include thinking about what are our values and how do we share that, you know, to enhance an environment of care and compassion and connection. So finally, I'm going to leave you in a little bit of this space, and I think we're going to wrap up early in that spirit of like turn an hour into 15 or 50 minutes. You know, I'm going to give you back a little bit of time. Think about, you know, connection. Okay. So compassion actually connects you. And that was that piece in the middle when I was saying, what's it feel like to really be seen? And we have such a hard time putting it into words. The energy that we're usually talking about, it's this feeling of compassion. It's a feeling of empathy. If you can tell that the person is seeing the world through your eyes and they are very much validating what your experience is. Well, here's the thing about compassion. It sometimes hurts, right? Any of you in the helping profession know that, but there is actually really good science about the fact that when you show compassion to yourself, when you show compassion to other people, when you connect with them and you like lean in, do you know that compassion is a measurable ingredient in delivering care that impacts the outcome? When we think about healthcare, do you know you can measure that compassion actually leads to better outcomes? It's incredible. There's a science about this. Do you also know that when you use compassion, what happens is that connection to other people, even though sometimes it hurts, that actually overwhelmingly what it does is it ends up helping to prevent us from burnout. So at a time where I feel like we're struggling because many of us, we might feel more disconnected or it's been harder to connect. I think it's true. We all know this, that we need to like lean in. We need to find more ways to create connection and to create that feeling of, hey, you're okay, I'm okay too. But that by leaning in, we actually are going to protect ourselves even further. We're going to be at a better space to protect ourselves from vicarious trauma, from burnout, from secondary stress. By exercising compassion, we can help ourselves to feel more sustained. So that's my final tip, because I think sometimes the idea is we'll self-care and withdraw. And that's true that we sometimes need to withdraw, but in balance, connection is actually very protective to people. So in all senses, I want to encourage people to remember that that shows up over and over and over again in the literature and in surveys, that being connected is protective for people. So whatever we're doing to take care of ourselves, thinking about what does that mean in terms of connecting to other people, super important. So I'm going to ask you, just as we conclude here, what are you going to do with this information? So we have spent nearly 2 hours together talking about challenges that we're facing, talking about the reality of the stress that we're under, but then also we shifted our focus totally in the second half to like, okay, what are you going to do? We talked about some life hacks. We talked about connecting to people, stress reduction, resiliency building. What are you actually going to do with the content? This piece is where we front load this in our brains, because just saying that you're going to do something different will actually make it more likely that you will. So it will make it easier for you to implement the change if you actually not only think it, but you name it outside of yourself. That plan will make it easier for you to do it. So let's take a minute and share with ourselves, with one another, with ourselves, what is our plan going to be?
I mean, I think I'm going to double down on Hawaiian Shirt Friday and try to make sure everyone, gets that a little bit of self-care and wears Hawaiian shirts and feels good about themselves on Fridays.
I need to hear more about this, because it looks like I saw it was Jason that was talking. I need to know more about, are you doing this at work?
Absolutely.
He does this everywhere. Can you turn your camera on for a second, Jason?
I mean, I can. I mean, I was already, hold on. I'm on my phone because I have to drive here shortly.
And I didn't think it was Friday. I thought it was
I'm already ahead of the
any day
game
that ended with day.
for my Hawaiian Shirt Friday. I came prepared today.
Any day
I'm
that
spreading
ends in
aloha
Y is
love
Hawaiian Shirt
throughout
Day
Beaver
for
County.
Jason.
And just so, and because
365.
everyone else is kind of sticking the muds and I can't control them, I'm going to wear one every day to make up for them not wearing it on Fridays.
Okay. All right. Well, I like it. And I don't know, Hawaiian shirts do actually make a big impact. I wasn't kidding. When I wear sneakers, it's like my whole life is different. So I am a believer in the Hawaiian shirt. So Jason, were you thinking a lot of the things we talked about today, you were kind of putting in the work environment? Do you want to add anything else?
I mean, some of them, and some of them, it's, for my own mental health and my own self-care. I often kind of put myself aside or on the back burner to worry about other people. And, sometimes that's easier to fix other people's problems than my own. So,
So I'm so glad that you said that, because actually this week someone said to me, we were kind of talking about a challenge that we were facing, and the person basically just said to me, hey, do you think it's possible that I feel like my life is so out of control that I'm just stuck on what I think these other people should do? And I thought, that's pretty insightful. And I think if we all asked ourselves those types of questions a little bit more, like what is going on with me right now that is causing this, we might find ourselves like realizing, Jason, to your point, that sometimes we put a lot of energy into thinking about other people because it's just a little bit easier than like taking on our own stuff sometimes. I'm very glad that you brought that up.
Absolutely. And it's just like my parents, do as I say, not as I do, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I was talking with a colleague of mine who's a doctor today who reminded me that they make terrible patients. I completely agree. But I don't think we're the only people that struggle with this. I also saw someone saying, you know, I'm going to share this information with my teen daughter. And I love that. I mean, I think a lot of times, as you know, I'm pretty sure that I didn't say a single thing that people in this room didn't know. You know, it might have been that you didn't know the data that's out there particularly right now, but I'm almost positive I didn't say anything like super interesting or new. I think that the part about why these types of trainings can be so valuable is because they remind us, and they also shift us into thinking more about like, what do we need to do differently to feel differently? And I think like that piece of sharing and getting the word out is another way that we impact ourselves, because it's almost contagious. You know, it's that thing of like, we are putting this out there to people, and the more we do together, then, you know, ultimately it sort of comes around to changing the entire environment. So please do share it, you know, kind of share that you're thinking about this. One huge way to impact this issue is just to tell people that you're thinking about ways to reduce stress, and you invite them to talk about that, including in the workplace. You know, less about, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, or oh my gosh, I can't keep up, and more about, hey, here's what I'm doing to like really try to change how I'm feeling. Like, what do you think? What are you up to? Shifting it to something a little bit more productive. I got a message too where someone shared, you know, that people sometimes what ends up happening is that they become so controlling, but they are trying to control other people. We all know we can't, but that quest to control other people, that can become really a bottomless pit and ends up creating more stress. But goodness, we all know it can feel a lot better than confronting that maybe we're the issue. So avoiding getting stuck there. I'm seeing a lot of too, like, change my expectations. Don't take your work phone on vacation. Whoever's going on vacation, that's great. This was really fun for me. So I do just want to tell you that I think you all were fantastic. And I know that these types of online formats, at least for me, can feel very challenging, because you probably can tell I'm like I like to be with people.